One of the great things about creating a product that relies on user-generated content and then is also hyper-horizontal, as long as there's adoption of the product, your users will constantly surprise you.
Welcome to the Seed Stage. I'm your host, Enzo, CEO at June. Every week, June and Point 9 invite the most inspiring product and growth leaders to share their practical advice on how to grow your SaaS. Whether this is a story behind a feature, a marketing framework, or a risky update made on the pricing, we're digging ideas you and your team can put in place next week. No fuzz, no BS. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Seed Stage, the podcast dedicated to early-stage startups that seek insight from successful operators that went from 0 to 1. Today, Christoph Janz, partner and co-founder of Point 9, is joining me as the co-host. Hi, Christoph.
Hi, Enzo.
Glad to have you here for this second episode together.
Thank you.
And I'm pumped to have our guest today, who is Vinay. And I'm not going to try your last name, Vinay, but maybe you want to say it.
Yeah, technically the way you pronounce it is Hiremath. It kind of sounds like Hiremath. I mean, for some of the English listeners, but it's Hiremath, Vinay Hiremath.
Perfect. And so for those who don't know you, you're the CTO and co-founder of Loom, and you're now the head of engineering and IT at Loom still, but through Atlassian. And and prior to that, so for those who don't know Loom, it's a quick video creation platform to record your screen yourself, or maybe both. Now it does a lot of other fancy stuff on top of it. You guys recently sold the company to Atlassian after 8 years in. And today we're going to go through that journey together. And before Loom, you were a software engineer for only a couple of years, which makes you a fairly young founder still.
Yeah, for sure. Super young, and it's been a journey for sure. Happy to talk through all of it.
Awesome. So yeah, thank you so much again for accepting the invite. And as a first question, I wanted to ask you: was there anything unexpected that you've seen someone use Loom for in the last couple of years?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the last couple of years, that's like a good projection down the lifetime of the company. Honestly, in the last couple of years, one of the great things about creating a product that relies on user-generated content and then is also hyper-horizontal, there's a lot of things that are bad about that I could cover too. But one of the good things is that as long as there's adoption of the product, your users will constantly surprise you. They'll constantly find ways to use your product in ways that you didn't think of and you didn't imagine. And because you're horizontal, you don't want to like overly specialize the platform to any one of these use cases. But some of the use cases end up being enduring. And one example that I could really think of is Parker Conrad, who's the founder and CEO of Rippling, basically using Loom to fundraise all the way up until meeting with the actual partners at a firm and doing like a firm presentation, which obviously there's a lot of nuance there. Parker Conrad has a few notches under his belt. He has a lot of leverage. But we've seen many operators and many execs start to fundraise primarily with Loom until there really needs to be a meeting. And so that fun deck overview, presentation overview, although there were a lot of people recording over decks and presentations, I think the high stakes nature of the communication format and then relying on the Loom platform was pretty mind blowing. Like the fact that people were raising hundreds of millions of dollars using our tool, definitely a standout use case. But there are plenty of other use cases, by the way. One that I just want to throw out that I think is kind of maybe fun is the wrong word, but I mean, like I don't know how familiar the listeners are with Venezuela's current political situation, but I've always, as a founder, I've always wanted to hop on calls with users who have used our product in different ways and that I find inspiring. And this guy, I guess I won't share his full name, but his name's Alberto. He ended up leaving Venezuela and fleeing Venezuela. And while he was doing that, he wasn't able to get on video calls. He wasn't able to join meetings. He's an engineer, and he ended up using Loom the entire time. And so there's also like there's one part of this that's like, what are the unique use cases that maybe are really broad, and then there's a whole set of use cases where honestly, as a founder, you're just kind of like proud that it happened on your platform. even though it might not happen over and over again. And in this case, like, obviously I would not want it. I would not want it to be the case that, people have to flee their country, but it's pretty amazing what being able to work async when you really need to unlocks for people.
I think what you just said, Vinay, about like the fact that it has pros and cons of being so horizontal, right? Maybe that's something to talk a little bit more about. I think that's super interesting for any founder who might be listening and like might start with a horizontal product where you don't really know so much yet about like what are the more narrow use cases or industries or personas. And maybe you can talk a bit about how you try to find the right balance there. Like, to what extent did you build for a specific use case in mind because it was a specifically high value use case or industry or persona? Because there are trade-offs, right? Like in terms of the language that you use, and Loom has never become a like fully verticalized, like we are only catering to this audience. Although in the very beginning it was, maybe that's something you can want to chat about as well. Like the use case in the very beginning was obviously like bug tracking, right? I guess it's still being used for bug reports as well, but I think would be super helpful for people watching this if you to hear you talk a bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. Christoph, I don't know if you remember, we had a board member at one point. His name's Trevor Oshlig.
Oh, yeah.
And I think
I know him well. Yeah. Still know him well. I caught up with him last week, actually.
For sure. And I am definitely going to be catching up with him over the next couple months. And, there's a lot of times, when you're on this journey, it's just like there's a lot of times where you're just going to be wrong, straight up wrong. And I remember Trevor being the voice on the board who really was pushing me and Joe to verticalize, and specifically to verticalize within sales. He looked at, he looked at the data rooms that we were reading over. He was like, look, these are high value cost centers within companies. Salespeople drive direct revenue and they're using Loom, but they don't have all of the last mile touch points they really need to use it repeatably and at scale, because recording a video is pretty heavy, right? So if you had to record a video for 100 prospects, it's like, that's not very useful. If you had to record it once, but then it's used for 100 prospects, then it becomes really generic. And so I think back to like Trevor's pushes because frankly, we didn't do a good job, I think, of balancing when we should go and verticalize against different customer segments. We didn't do a good job of that. And we also waited too long to monetize against our user base. Those were kind of like the two biggest mistakes I think we made early on. Like it's funny, another board member, Ilya Fushman, was talking to me and Joe, and he was like, I feel like I've been duped. I feel like I thought I was I thought I was investing in a B2B SaaS company. And in reality, I have no idea whether or not this is like a consumer company because you guys like don't charge your users anything. And so we really focused within the horizontal platform area as long as we possibly could to drive up the product value as long as we possibly could. And there's always this question of like, okay, I have some segments of customers who really need these last mile features and integrations. When do I build it? And instead of going off and building that, once we built a Teams platform product, we ended up continuing to build things like Loom HQ, which was our video system of record, our Loom SDK. And although I think these bets are going to win out in the long term, I think we ended up going after a need and a set of needs and use cases that the market frankly wasn't ready for. And now what we're doing is we're going all in on our sales customer persona. So we're building, the last mile integrations with HubSpot and Salesforce. We just released our Salesforce integration not too long ago. Really easy features like de-anonymization, the ability for someone to send out a video and then require an email address in order to view. These are like super small features, but they just get, deprioritized based on your strategy. And then some really cool things like we're building video variables where, you can select any part of the video transcript, update it with like a mail merge sort of list of different words that you want the user to say. And eventually the video will update. Like we will use text to speech and lip sync to update the video so you can do massive personalization at scale and combine those notifications into the outbound engines.
Yeah.
We should have done a lot of this stuff, frankly, like 2 to 3 years earlier. And we didn't. And frankly, like you're going to have competitors who pop up, especially when you're a horizontal product that everybody ends up using, who capitalize on this opportunity. I obviously believe that Loom is still going to dominate the sales persona. We're still going to dominate the marketing persona. We're going to dominate all of our key personas. But I think that what I've really learned to recognize that is maybe a little bit more abstract than like concretely you start with a horizontal use case and when do you verticalize is the importance of a really good strategy. And so early on, your strategy as a company is like, okay, I think there's a problem in the world and I'm building up a hypothesis, but I have no idea if this is a real product or like if this is a real problem. I have no idea whether or not the problem I'm solving is a painkiller problem or a vitamin problem. And sometimes you can talk to users and you can figure it out, especially if you're in a more enterprise or upmarket like segment that you're serving. But a lot of times you just got to ship something and see how people use the product. And so that ends up being your strategy early on. And a lot of founders who start horizontal companies end up sticking to that strategy, which is magical because you have to have a belief in yourself. But I think they end up under investing in their verticalization strategy. And so now we're finally starting to do it. We're starting to finally build integrations. We don't want to overbloat the main Loom platform. We just want to make these features available to people as they need them and as they discover them. But, frankly, we should have done that. We should have done that earlier.
Yeah. Super interesting and also really exciting that you were working on some of the things now in terms of like personalization and using AI, obviously, because I remember like we spoke about some of this long time ago when it felt like a bit science fiction still and a bit creepy. Like I remember we weren't, I think if I remember correctly, we weren't sure if we should ever touch something going into the direction of deepfake. But it was a different world, right? Like, so,
for sure,
I'm excited to see more of this coming live.
Totally. And that comment on it was a different world is like, it's such an important comment because like, I really want to harp on this point that most people are not good at developing a strategy. Even myself included. Like, I still think I'm on this journey of figuring out how to develop really strong strategies. There's this amazing book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And there's a lot of points in the book, but one of the fundamental principles of having a strategy that actually makes sense is having a guiding principle that fires and fuels the strategy that is easy to understand and makes sense and is defensible. And I think that, a lot of times the guiding principles that we work off of when we just assume that the strategy is infallible have to do with the world and the market and what people are ready for. And so, Christoph, yeah, for sure. Like at one point, the strategy of let's sell Loom to the largest enterprises in the world made no sense. It made absolutely no sense. Now that people are working in a more async and remote way, and it seems like that's here to stay, it seems obvious, right? And so I think the thing that I, myself and Joe and other execs have really been trying to hone in on is how do you actually build strategies that make as much sense as they possibly can with the information that you have, and don't try to dismiss where the market and the world is at. Obviously, there's a flip side to this, which is when you're a really big company, you might over strategize on the market and you might underinvest in things where the market is really small, but it's going to grow over time. And so there's a whole like innovator's dilemma part of this conversation. But I just wanted to double down on that fact. Like, the world's a different place.
And sorry, Enzo, I'm asking a lot of questions here. I know you've prepared a lot of other questions too, but I think on this thing that you just spoke about, Vinay, if you pair this with like a once in a lifetime, hopefully pandemic, right? Hopefully something that only happens once in a century, which really nobody prepared for, and which really turned the world upside down and led to, like in case of Loom, actually a ton of growth, right? And then you somehow had to try to understand the signals and I guess sort of try to predict like what could the world look like when this is over, which I think nobody got right. So maybe that's something to talk a little bit about as well, because obviously Loom was one of these companies that benefited a lot from everything going online and remote, but then also had a drop once the world started to become like more physical, and gladly Loom went through these ups and downs and went up again, right? There are other companies like Hopin, spectacularly, famously, which didn't make it. So maybe that's something to talk a bit about how you navigated that.
For sure. So right before the pandemic started, I got a call from one of our earliest angels, this gentleman, Andy Chu. And, he started this company called Coverity and then co-invested with Ben Shelf and a few other people out of this boutique VC firm called Elementum. And he called me, and I thought that was odd because I'm close with Andy, but, he doesn't just randomly call me. And so I took the call. I stepped out of my dinner and took this call, and he was explaining to me how he had just moved his family to China, and how everything was closing down and like the schools had no way to deal with it operationally, and was just explaining how bad COVID was, and basically told us, look, like, you guys are going to have to deal with this. Like, this is coming to the US. It's not something you're going to be able to escape. This is going to hit the world. And honestly, from what I've seen, schools and companies are really ill-equipped to deal with async and remote work. And you guys are at the center of this. And you, like, both from like doing what's good from your heart, you should help out in some way, but then also from capitalizing on this as a company. Like, this is a huge moment and you don't want to be caught on your back, on your heels. And so, myself and Joe, talked about this, and we tried to figure out, well, what can we do to provide Loom to as many people as possible? We looked at it as both a growth moment and a moment to kind of empower people to get work done, and hopefully do some good in the world. And so pretty immediately, maybe a week or a week and a half after that, we scrambled to get a team together. We ended up releasing an education tier of our product where Loom is free for individual educators and students who want to sign up to it. And then we cut our prices by half. And obviously that had a massive effect on our growth. There was a bunch of stuff that happened after that. Our growth on our servers were increasing by, 1 to 10,000%, week over week, and everything was failing. But we were able to get out of it somewhat unscathed. And I think that that's kind of like an important lesson. Like, the pandemic was a moment in time. Hopefully, as you said, Christoph, never again. Like, I would not want to go back to being locked in my house. But I think these moments happen in the world. And as a business leader, you need to figure out, does this affect my company? Is my company relevant to what's going on? And is there a way to capitalize on the growth? Going back to strategies, and I promise not to make this entire podcast about strategies, but when we were thinking through our AI strategy, maybe like starting a year ago, I put in a document to the engineers that we really should not discount the fact that right now, anybody who releases AI product that seems actually useful gets a ton of hype around that release. Like, we shouldn't rest on our laurels and be like, it should just be about like delivering what's useful, whatever. It's like, there's a growth opportunity here. And so, I think there are these moments in time, and the pandemic was certainly one of them. We were not prepared, as nobody was. I remember our servers failing over, and then our head of infrastructure hopping on a call with me and telling me he was leaving to start his own company. And like, there were a whole suite of problems that happened. And, there were two distinct periods of what I would call hyperscale for Loom during the pandemic. And then reintegrating back into reality, frankly, I think that myself and Joe and many founders that I know we had lost a sense of what was real, and so when the world went back to normal, quote unquote, I think that, we were in this period where interest rates were super low, money was flowing really quickly, people were making ridiculous, decisions like, offering their employees loans to like buy stock, and like there's just a bunch of crazy shit that was happening, right? And I wish I could say I was like the super stoic leader who like had it all figured out, and I was like, this was crazy, and I didn't buy into any of the hype, but I think we did. And so when the world started going back to normal, of course our growth started to drop, and we had to reassess on the back end of 2 different rounds of layoffs. The first of which I led as our VP of People, which is a whole nother story. We had to assess, what kind of a company were we going to be, and how were we going to get back to baseline reality and build a real business here. And so I think a lot of companies are still going through that transition. I don't think that's fully, we're not fully out the gate there yet.
What a journey. And throughout that journey, it seems like you did the accordion. Like it seems like you started very broad, trying to solve the problem for many people, then managed to kind of narrow down, then pandemic hit again. And so everyone who would need you would come on the platform. Again, you would just atomize your persona. And now you seem to be zooming into the sales and marketing persona a little bit more. Is it the way you think about it? And also, I'm a bit curious just to ground the conversation a bit on this on the strategy and what it represented. How did you decide, or when did you decide what was the right set of problems and the right persona to keep or not keep? Like, because I feel looking backward, you guys have done such an amazing job, and now you look at it being like, maybe we should have zoomed in. But I wonder if it wasn't the right decision in the end for you to be very agnostic.
For sure. So just to recap the questions, the first question was, is that an accurate representation of like the journey for Loom? And the truth is that as a founder, I don't know, I truly don't know, because there are just so many things happening all the time. When you have your first inkling of product market fit and you have as diverse of a user base as Loom does, it's hard to know like what you were truly doing at any given time, besides the main focus of the product and go-to-market strategies, right? And so I think that you're probably right looking back on it. We could say that there was a bit of an accordion effect, but I think like the truth is that at the heart of Loom, we want to build products that are generally useful to many people. And so we're never going to be like, Loom is never going to be like the super power user. For instance, we're building more video editing capabilities now. We're never going to be like the super power user video editor. We're never going to be Final Cut Pro in the browser. What people come to Loom for is quick video polishing, quick video recording. And we're going to stay true to that. We think that's where the maximum amount of opportunity is for communicating at work with video. Like we still think that there's just too large of a journey ahead of us. And so how does that proliferate? It means that, we're considering features, we're considering new product lines that, yes, they'll serve like the sales persona, they'll serve the marketing persona, but we're always asking ourselves that question of how do we make this feature generally useful to a lot of people? So even within the sales persona, the video variables product, it's going to address a lot of sales use cases, but it's also going to address a lot of marketing and talent and recruiting and just general outbound use cases, support. Like there are going to be ways that people use this that hopefully isn't just like tied to a Salesforce button, both because spending a ton of your time in Salesforce is a sad existence, but also because a lot of people get their work done on other platforms. And so I think that we always knew we were a general platform, but we wanted to build specific personas in a way that was powerful for many people. Now, how did we know that we wanted to tackle sales or any sort of persona that we wanted to tackle? We got this wrong a lot, and I'm sure Christoph remembers it. Like we ended up focusing on engineering for a while. And the truth was that Loom at the time that we were thinking about focusing on engineering was good enough for engineers. Like they actually didn't want much more. They actually wanted landing pages that just told them how to use Loom. And so now we're also refocusing on engineering with more of a focus on like ingesting network logs and console logs for bug ticketing purposes. But, you know, a lot of time has passed and a lot of technology has like unlocked that capability. Within sales, we saw people within sales going to other competitors like Vidyard. And so we had a more clear market competitor that was obviously gaining momentum. But we also saw in a lot of sales calls, myself included, that there was kind of this bifurcation where a lot of the PDE teams were using Loom and loved Loom, and salespeople started adopting Loom and also loved the user experience of Loom. But then when they really wanted to use video for, you know, broadcast sort of use cases, we didn't have any of the integrations. And then they churned to Vidyard and other competitors. And so we had a lot of data at the point, because we took too long to focus on the sales ICP. I think we just had a lot of data that told us customers are willing to pay to standardize to the Loom platform. It is a better user experience. More people keep Loom, the brand, top of mind, but we weren't meeting them where they were working. And so I don't know if that like super clearly answered your question. I'm sorry if it didn't, but yeah.
It does really well. Just like maybe as a follow-up question, if you had specialized on the persona earlier on, like Loom was a tool for sales on like, let's say year 2 or year 3, do you think you would have changed the perception of Loom being this tool for everyone that now can be for everyone? Or do you think this is BS and basically you could have tackled sales first and then go to marketing and then go to engineer and so on and so forth?
For sure. Well, I think it's really, you know, look, we just talked about like multiple shifts that have happened in the world over the last 9 years. I think it's really difficult to say how people will perceive your brand or product. But I think that you can focus on the things that maybe shift that perception. And so what I could say is that I personally don't believe that if we had focused on the sales ICP early on, offered the integrations, offered the products, that necessarily means we have to like completely redo all of our marketing and say Loom is only for salespeople. That's a company decision. That's a strategic decision. So I think we could have done it, but whether or not people would have then started to say, oh yeah, like Loom is really good for sales. That's primarily what they do, but they like claim to do all this other stuff. I have no idea. I have no idea how that would have played out in the reality of the world. So I'd like to say that, you know, it's up to you and you have a fair bit of control over, you know, how people perceive your brand based on what you put on your product and what you surface. But the truth is that you don't know. And frankly, you know, there's really a higher level conversation about brand, which is something I would, you know, I could talk about for hours, and I'm sure you guys could too. And, you know, it's a really noisy world. Like we're more connected than ever. People have a wider array of tools than they ever did. Making these tools is becoming easier. It's going to get more commoditized over time to build these types of products. And, you know, like Loom, frankly, has always had a really solid brand. So I would almost say that our obsession over customer support and really polished and fast and instant user experiences, our obsession over that performance, which we've gone on so many technical and product and ops journeys to just make sure we were the best performing product in market. That more than anything probably built the perception that Loom is for as many people as possible.
Yeah,
very interesting.
And I would also, I mean, unfortunately we can't A/B test this, right? And try to attribute like success and failure to decisions in the past. But just from my perspective, I think like really the usability, the speed, the brand, I think all of this played a huge role. It was also what made me fall in love with the tool instantly. Like it's really the difference between seeing it for the first time and like hearing about it. Like if somebody had told me there is this company, they let you record your screen, I wouldn't even have wanted to take a call. But I would have said there is Camtasia or something. So you really have to see it to get, but then I think you get it immediately. And then I think Loom is a really special company. Well, in a lot of ways, but one is that I think probably 98% of the companies that I work with, my advice to them early on is focus on the smallest possible segment, right? That you can really then build the best possible product and dominate that niche and then expand gradually over time. But Loom is so universally useful, and it has this element of virality that the recipient of the Loom is exposed to the brand, which is a big incentive to, at least for some period of time, just open the floodgates, right, and let it be used by as many people as possible, and let the people who receive a Loom join Loom as well. And I think that at least in the early years, that was a big driver of the growth. Correct me if I'm wrong. Just the inherent virality and contributed to the brand being really basically people. You said this before, Enzo. You hear it all the time. People tell you, "Let me send you a Loom." It has it has become synonymous with the category and a household name, at least in our little tech world. Maybe not the world at large yet, but at least in our part of the world. And I think that is a huge element of defensibility now, that there is more competition, because obviously now other people will also create easy to use video recording tools. And I know you have a lot of tech and roadmap, but I think the brand plays an incredible role.
100%. And I think that your advice to most companies to focus on, a niche customer and make sure they really love it is amazing advice. I think that when I think about Loom, we got the opportunity was a lucky opportunity in a few ways. One is that the capability was really generic, right? Not every company has a generic capability. Christoph, I'm an investor in Adio, and they're doing CRM, they're doing superpowered CRM management, and that's not something an engineer is just going to pick up. But with video recording, it's a capability that's generally useful for a lot of people. Now the next question is the elasticity of demand inelastic enough across a wide enough array of personas that you can really go horizontal? And luckily, at least when you're early on, it's pretty easy to test that. And I think it's fairly easy to figure out, okay, is this really useful? I think Loom got really lucky in the sense that, we built a capability that was really general purpose. And so I was saying that if you're building a CRM, that's going to only be really useful for a few different personas. Recording video is conceivably useful to many different people. The next question is, well, is the elasticity of demand inelastic enough if all of these different personas were to use this new capability? And luckily for Loom, the answer was yes. And so I think that if you're going horizontal, both of those things probably have to be true. The third thing that was true for Loom that we got truly lucky on, that I don't know if anybody could have projected out, is that the behavior change of actually recording videos in an async work environment also ended up taking off and bolstering that usage across a bunch of different personas. And so I think the advice to hyper focus on a target customer is probably the right advice 99% of the time. And luckily, at least if you're really early in your journey, I think it's pretty easy to test it out anyway. If we had built Loom and then tried to get it into engineers' hands, but they just didn't use it at all, no matter how much we tried, it's at a certain point you have to be okay, maybe this isn't an engineering tool. Maybe this is just a support and sales tool. So yeah, I think you're spot on, Christoph.
What kind of signals were you looking at to understand if the tool could be adopted across the different people? Because one bias that a lot of founders have is thinking that the product can be horizontalized, right?
Yeah.
And Atio, we know them really well. They're not fooled. They're very smart people, and they know where they're going. But a lot of people might think, look, I'm building a CRM, and it could be a personal tool, right? It could be the notion of CRM, and HR, whatever, might use CRM in the future to do X, Y, and Z. And maybe they're right, maybe they're not, right? What were the signals you looked at to understand whether or not this was the real thing?
I mean, it's just such a fundamentally good question, because essentially what you're asking, like, you have to, as a company, you have to figure out when you build a product what your activation metric is. And that's your main metric to know that someone has used the product, gotten value out of it, and also likely has a high chance of retaining and coming back. And so for Loom, that activation metric was what we call, and it's funny, it's still the same activation metric after like, eight or so years. That activation is called a video first view. And so our perspective is, you want to send Looms to anybody internal and external to get your work done. And you've gotten some value out of it if you've recorded the video, sent it to someone, and gotten at least one view on it. And so, for us, the signal was, okay, well, if we weren't getting a lot of VFVs on recordings from different personas, maybe it's not that useful of a tool across different user categories. And I think that's like a really common problem for founders who go hyper horizontal, is they create a really horizontal product and then they don't know how to like market it to the right people. And then maybe a lot of people come try the product. They're like really interested, but then they have no idea what to do, right? Like they end up turning off immediately because they're like, I could see how this could be useful, but I have no idea, like maybe a good analog today would be if someone was trying to create an app store on top of, ChatGPT or these LLMs. It's like, hey, you can do like an app for anything. It's like you're going to get a bunch of people who maybe are interested in AI, maybe are interested and have an idea, but you're probably going to get a lot of people who are like, I don't know how this applies to my day to day. And so for us, the signal was, are people getting video first views? And then also talking to customers and understanding, what are your use cases? Like, is there something we missed? Are you using this in a way that gives us an idea of how another team might want to use it and isn't currently? And that's actually a huge gap. That those gaps in usage end up being the core of your go-to-market motion, right? So like when we were talking to like the number of enterprise companies that we were going up market against post-pandemic, it was a really common occurrence, and it's still a really common occurrence for a single team to use Loom, for let's say design, and they have no idea how to use it elsewhere, or they don't even know that's a possibility. So when they come up to renewal, we deploy a CSM and we say, hey, we know you've been having a lot of success with Loom within design. Just so you know, they're also working with these engineering teams, and your engineers could use Loom for a whole suite of use cases. And here's all the stats on how it's actually effective for other engineering teams. So obviously it takes a while to build up that narrative and have all those proof points. But I think the most basic first thing is, if you want to go horizontal, when you build something and you try to market horizontally, are people activating on your product, and are they coming back based on the persona? And if there are certain personas that just aren't, maybe it's a flaw in your product and you want to go on that journey because you have a belief and a bias as a founder. But at a certain point, you're going to have to make a decision and say, okay, maybe we're just not a horizontal product. Maybe we're actually a sales product. Maybe we're actually a marketing product. Yeah.
Perfect. Great answer to the question. There are two directions we can go into. Christoph, you're going to pick. I want to talk about brand and marketing, or I want to talk about the technical constraint and how much of an impact they had on Loom and the early direction and the scale. Which one is more inspiring to you?
I feel like we talked a little bit about brand and marketing already. Obviously, only touched the surface there, but I think the tech and infrastructure side is definitely something we should also talk about a bit, because this has been, I think, more relevant at Loom than maybe your average SaaS company, because the product is more like bandwidth and CPU hungry. And it's also something which now a lot of companies have to think about as they use LLMs. So I think most companies in most of the last 15 years didn't really have to think so much about COGS as a software company. In some spaces, people had to think about that, and with AI, maybe more. So I would love to talk about that.
For sure.
Let's go for it. Yes. So that's a great question, COGS. And I'm also very curious to hear about the constraint of Loom, because you mentioned a few things. You mentioned that initially you didn't explore AI because it wasn't there. Then you mentioned that one of your winning advantage was to be able to render very quickly the video, which at the time was completely mind-blowing. I still remember the first time I recorded a Loom and it was already ready. Whether it was a preview or something else, I don't know, but it was just clearly technically ahead. Then you mentioned taking the market when the COVID kicked in because you could scale your infra. Obviously, there were a lot of challenges. Your head of engineering or someone you mentioned left. And now this problem that Christoph mentioned, which is COGS and being more mindful, even though there is a bit more cash that is in Loom now that you've sold the company. Like, what was the role overall of like this, technical excellence at the company?
Yeah, honestly, early on, I always told I don't really know. This might have been a bad recruiting move on my part, to be completely honest, but people like came to Loom when we had like 4 or 5 engineers, and they're like, "Oh, these guys like and gals, they must be like, experts in video and know about all these video encoding technologies." And the truth is that we were just kind of like the plumber persona of engineers. Like we ended up becoming video experts because we had to, and not really because we were before. And there's always been this engineering cultural value at Loom called open black boxes. And the reason why I'm covering off on this today is because I feel like a lot of people probably look at what's going on with LLMs and AI, and it's super technical stuff. And I think there's a lot of really capable people who are probably going to short pocket themselves and not actually go on a technical journey to build something meaningful because they just don't think they can. And the truth is that whenever you build out anything technical, you realize that no matter how many experts you had on the team, it's like that was certainly important to some degree. But at the end of the day, you just had to do a bunch of shit to just make it work, and you had to just figure stuff out. It's not like, the problems presented themselves and it's like, sweet, we have like the perfect set of skill sets to tackle this exact problem. And so with Loom, at first with the rendering, yes, like it was technically impressive, but as with all technological change, it gets commoditized over time. Like what we find mind blowing about LLMs today will be commonplace very soon. And in fact, already are. Like I think people are already finding it commonplace to work with tools like ChatGPT and Llama. Early on, we ended up building out this video streaming pipeline. We ended up trying to make it as instant as possible. We ended up getting really lucky with a lot of video protocols that ended up landing on market. And we ended up getting really lucky multiple times. Like the Chrome extension itself, the desktop recording your full desktop ended up landing like a year into us launching our Chrome extension. And then like all of the APIs on the underlying Mac and Windows like native layer, those video layers ended up getting hardened because of the market, right? Like the market was rewarding people doing these video calls and video recording capabilities. So I think we got lucky in some ways. And then on the other end, we ended up setting the right culture, which was, look, no matter what, you're an engineer. I'm not going to expect a front-end engineer that does JavaScript at Loom to fine-tune and train a model from scratch. But like within reason, we're all full-stack engineers. We should be able to figure out some set of things and get it right. And so we just ended up following that over and over again. And then no matter how daunting the task was, there was a moment where, I went to Bruno on our core media team and I was like, hey, we need to make editing instant as well. We need to be able to like trim and stitch the video instantly. And he was like, okay, well, like that just doesn't seem to be possible. And I was like, well, we need to get it done in like 3 weeks. And so like, I was like, you're going to clear everything else out that you have to do, and we're just going to do it. So like, that's what's going to happen. And I know that seems ridiculous. And it's like a lot of engineers are probably rolling their eyes and they're like, yeah, sure, you just got lucky, whatever. But I think that really pushing your team to try is like often just the first step that people don't take. And now we're talking about the AI journey. Early on, like deep learning primitives were not mature enough to like TTS and lip sync, text to speech, and modifying the video to like move your lips to the movement of like a new word. That was technology that was not very mature. Now it is. And in the spirit of opening black boxes, right now I'm dropping in on an intro to ML class at Columbia. And so I continue to do this, like it's like you as a technical leader, if you really want to be at the forefront of something that seems complex, you just got to open the black boxes. And I think a lot of people just stop themselves from doing it. And then you got to figure out where on the stack are you, like there was a period where we were thinking about getting rid of our native recording layers that allow us to do 4K recordings instantly and as compressed as possible with the least number of resources on the machine. And we were thinking about just adopting the web APIs. And I stopped that. I stopped that work stream. I'm like, what are we doing? We have like a massive technical advantage over here. Why are we getting rid of it? For what? For like performance gains? This is the core technology of our business. But then when we started going after AI more fully and started to think about, okay, well, what can we do outside of just writing API calls to ChatGPT? We had to also look at that realistically and be like, okay, are we going to compete with Facebook and Google on the massive amount of data set that they have and try to re-implement all these models? Probably not. And so now we're taking a bet that the open source model space is going to continue to accelerate. And so we're,
Yeah, you were at Facebook. Like, do we want to compete with Facebook and Google? Probably not.
Right. And so the answer is, we probably don't want to compete with these massive companies that have a huge cash injection to be able to hire the best AI talent in the world at $1 million a year and then just work across all of this data that we don't have. And so we're kind of sitting on the AI end at an intersection where we're using the open source tools, we're modifying it, and we're training it on our own data. But largely, the mode that Loom is in right now is we have the largest corpus of conversational video data. So the video that's recorded on Loom, a lot of times is from one person to another, and it's not meant for broadcasting, right? Like the conversation that we're having today, if I talked like this all the time with my friends, they would be annoyed at me. They'd be like, dude, like, just talk like a normal human. This is not a podcast, right? And so like the amount of conversational recorded data we have on Loom is astounding. It's like we're ingesting petabytes of information every week that's of this type of data. And it simply does not exist at this high of a quality anywhere else online. And so right now, where we're operating in that AI stack is using and modifying the open source models, but then fine tuning it and training it on our proprietary data. Now, in the future, if that ends up leading to this video variables feature where people are willing to use our translation technology instead of other video platforms and video editors, then we have a data moat, right? And then we're in a different place where we can reassess and say, okay, given people are paying for product quality here, does it actually make sense for us to train a model from scratch? And so where you are on the technical journey and what part of the stack you need to own, you have to listen to like your gut intuition and common sense. But I think honestly, the more important point, especially in today's world with so much technological change, is that I think a lot of founders are going to shortchange themselves and just not go on a technical journey and just not open black boxes because they just assume it's impossible or it's impossibly hard. And so we've gone on this journey. Like I could talk about so many more technical journeys that we've gone on, but I'll kind of leave it to that mini rant.
A great way to wrap it up and to talk about the next stage and the future for the company. Thank you so much, Vinay, for coming. Thank you, Christoph, for being the co-host today.
Thank you so much, Vinay. Thank you, Enzo.
Guys, thanks so much for having me.
It was great to have you. So 3 conclusions from the discussion today. There were many more learnings, but the 3 I got were you can go horizontal or vertical. The only thing is not to lie to yourself. And for that, activation metrics are your best friend. Activation metric also can survive over time since you guys kept the same for many, many years. The second lesson I got from today is don't wait too long to monetize. Again, probably a good way to validate your persona and the value you're building. And the last one is an engineering principle, which is open black boxes or basically push your team to try out things. Thank you so much for this learning, Vinay. If people want to engage with you, where should they go?
I mean, they can, if you're a founder just looking for advice, I love talking to other founders. Hopefully I don't give wrong advice. Like, even as you were talking about those lessons, in the back of my mind, I think this is like maybe the foible of being like a founder that's done it once. I'm like, oh man, I can think of all of those lessons going terribly wrong for like certain teams. So if you're a founder who just wants to like talk and jam, reach out to me on my personal email, which is my first initial V and then my last name, Hiremath, and then the number 4@gmail.com. Or you can reach out to me on Twitter, and my Twitter handle is VHMTH. My DMs are open.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I point to both sources. Thank you so much, Vinay. Thank you, Christoph.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Seed Stage. The best way to support us is by leaving a 5-star review. The team is pushing hard to bring you the best stories and insights, and your feedback helps others discover our podcast too. So please, if you haven't done it, take a moment to leave us a review. This means a lot. Until the next episode, take care.